Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, distinguished delegates, perhaps you could take your seats so we can resume our session. Distinguished ministers and vice ministers, distinguished delegates, I call to order the fifth meeting of the 56th session of the Commission for Social Development. I invite the Commission to begin its consideration of sub-item 3C, entitled Emerging Issues, towards sustainable and resilient societies, innovation and interconnectivity for social development. And I welcome you all to the high-level panel discussion on this topic. Distinguished delegates, I'm delighted to welcome our distinguished speakers to this high-level panel session. We have Dr. Sen Gong, Research Fellow of the Development Research Center of the State Council and Executive Vice President of the China Center for International Knowledge on Development. We have Ms. Noor Al-Malki Al-Jahani, Executive Director of the Doha International Family Institute. We have Mr. Walter Valdivia, Senior Policy Editor for the MacArthur's Center at George Mason University, Senior Fellow to CSPO, a science policy think tank at Arizona State University, and adjunct at the faculty at St. Johns Hopkins University. We have Ms. Maria Garrido, Research Assistant Professor and Principal Research Scientist at the Technology and Social Change Group at the University of Washington. And we have Ms. Donna Shida, President of the International Federation of Library Associations and Institutions from 2015 to 2017. And last but not least, I'm delighted to welcome our moderator, Mr. Jeremy Millard, Chief Policy Advisor of the Danish Technological Institute in Denmark, Research Fellow at Bradford University in the United Kingdom, as well as Special Advisor to DG Connect of the European Commission on Public Sector Innovation, E-Governance and Public Services. Mr. Millard undertakes selective assignments on e-government, public sector innovation, the Knowledge Society, plus open and social innovation in Europe, North America, Africa and Asia. And he counts the EC, the UN, OECD, and the World Bank amongst his clients and partners, as well as numerous governments, businesses, and civil society organizations. He's published over 20 peer-reviewed articles and book chapters over the last 5 years, as well as editing a number of specialized journal editions. Before I hand over to the floor to Mr. Millard to moderate the panel discussion, I wish to remind panelists, if they could, to keep to their allotted time limit of between 5 and 10 minutes per presentation. And I would ask delegations, please, to keep within the 3-minute time limit during the interactive discussion, precisely to make it as interactive as possible. With that, I hand over to Mr. Millard. Mr. Millard, you have the floor. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and welcome to everybody here. This is a fascinating session. There's a lot of issues to discuss, I think, here. And I hope we're going to have some fun as well as some deep and instructive and fruitful discussion. That's the purpose. The complexity of this task is quite enormous, but it's really important, I think, in the context of the Sustainable Development Goals, because society is not just about economics and not just about technology. It's about those things, but it's also about social development and people's happiness and welfare as well, very much. And those are critical issues which we need to focus on in the context of the way technology, innovation, and infrastructures are changing so fast. There's a couple of things when many people think about technology, they think technology is neutral. But of course it is, in the sense that you can use it in a good way or a bad way. And maybe we'll discuss what those good and bad ways are, and all the stops in between those two extremes as well. But it's also very much socially constructed. It's up to us as a society what sort of technology we develop and how we apply it. Often, of course, it's driven by the market, but there are many examples out there as well where it's driven by social need and social good. And we need a balance between those things. But technology is also, I guess, the physical manifestation of human civilization. It's how we've expressed ourselves in the physical world. But I think one of the challenges that we're seeing now in the 21st century is technology is becoming not just physical, it's actually penetrating the digital world, it's penetrating the biology, it's penetrating every aspect of our lives. And one of the issues which I think is now being discussed a lot, particularly by the World Economic Forum, for example, is what they call the fourth industrial revolution. Now, I guess many of you have heard about that, but it's, I think, quite an important topic to discuss. And the first industrial revolution, I guess, was the steam engine, which enabled people to no longer use their muscles, but to get machines to do the heavy lifting for them. Then came electricity, which enabled factories and homes to be given light and heat and power. And then, I think, in the middle of the last century, we had the information technology revolution, which enabled much activity in knowledge, interaction to take place digitally. But today we're seeing in the fourth industrial revolution a change which is starting to show, as many people are pointing out, that there's a blending between the digital world, the physical world, and the biological world. If we think about things like 3D printing, additive manufacturing, it's now possible to convert electronic bits of information into physical objects. And this was recognized and started by the MIT team in Harvard, which talked about the center of bits and atoms. And you can actually now scan any object electronically, send a file to someone on the other side of the world, and they can print it out exactly in the same way as the original. So in the same way that the music industry has enabled anybody to replicate and distribute music ubiquitously around the world, it's now possible in theory and in practice to share physical objects around the world. And when we're starting to use 3D printing, additive manufacturing with plastics and metals and all sorts of other materials as well, the implications of that for our economy and our society, I think, are quite immense. But just to think about that in terms of the social implications on the world to work, for example, if some of the prognosis about the way the world of work is changing are that because of things like artificial intelligence, where many jobs today can be done by an algorithm or the machine, not just physical jobs, or menial routine jobs, but also middle management jobs. There's now prognosis that 47% of US jobs are at risk of automation over the next 5 to 10 years. And robots are threatening between 40 and 75 million jobs worldwide, just today, and who knows what's going to happen in the future. So what's happening is there's a replacement not just of low and no-skilled jobs, but also starting to replace medium and high-skilled jobs as well, taking decisions based upon big data. That's one part of that is also that many workers in this economy are being connected to customers through the platform economy. You think of Uber and you think of things like Airbnb, for example. Buyers and sellers could be connected very easily. And people working in what we call the gig economy, they are finding that they have no control over their wages, they have no control over the quality of the work they are doing, they have no control over when and where they will be working. So they're very much being put, or many of them anyway, into a position where they are losing all the traditional rights and long-term prospects which they normally have had in a traditional job. And this is increasingly being seen as a problem. And it means probably that governments and also responsible employers have to step in and start to regulate and make sure that the quality of work and thereby the quality of people's lives is protected. So finally, I just want to say what fascinates me is what machines do best and what people do best, because this is a fundamental issue, I think, in this discussion. We know that machines and big data are increasingly able to do all the routine jobs, all the rule-based jobs very, very quickly and very, very easily using lots and lots of data and start to take decisions, as I said before. But people, as human beings, we also have other types of capacities and abilities. We have the emotional intelligence. We have moral authority. We have the ability to be creative across a whole range of different activities, because even today, most of the algorithms being developed by the tech companies, they're really excellent at doing very specialized tasks, but they're not very good yet, and that may change, of course, in the future, but they're not very good at doing a range of tasks together and seeing the links between them. So there's still a huge amount of stuff that human beings can do. Yeah? So there are many people who are saying, this is the end of work. Machines are going to take over everything. Other people are saying, no, we're going to get better quality work, higher wages, more leisure time. So I don't know where you stand on that debate or where it's going to go and what we need to do in terms of social policy to influence that debate and influence what happens. And that's just looking at the world of work, and there are many other areas which we should be looking at as well, of course. So this really is a time of change. I don't just mean politically, that's part of it as well, but in terms of the way the technology is innovating and changing so fast that it's impossible for anybody, any organisation, any government to keep up with it. How do we re-establish control of that? What are the social policies which we need in combination between governments, private sector and civil society to agree on to make sure the technology is there for the social good and the good of our future generations as well? I think this is the main or one of the critical challenges which we need to discuss today. And I'm 100% sure that our panelists will make a good contribution to that debate, and there will be an excellent discussion after that. So enough from me. I would now like to call on the first speaker, Dr. Zhen Gong from the China Center for International Knowledge on Development. The floor is yours, sir, to make your presentation.
Thank you, moderator. Can we get the PPT? Yes, it's already. This topic is really very broad. Basically, it's about the interaction between social policy and the technological advance. It's very broad. But my talk is going to focus on two cases in China to harness technology advance, especially in interconnectivities, to address two big development issues in China. One is regional disparity. Another one is urban and rural divide. So the first case is Chongqing. Chongqing is the inland province in China, but over the past 10 years, its economic and social development has really very fast. In many sense, we think this should be attributed to transportation development. Let's look at the first diagram. This diagram shows the Chongqing's economic growth compared to the national average. Over the past 10 years, this diagram shows the last 20 years, but in the first 20 years, the growth rate almost the same. Chongqing's growth rate almost same as the national average, but over the past 10 years, it's about 4 percentage points higher than the national average. And also, in terms of population, for the first 10 years, something, the Chongqing's population has been declined. Many of them have moved out to the eastern region of China, but in the last 10 years, some of them has really come back to their hometown. So we think that's of course the many factors for the success, but we think one basic condition for the success of Chongqing is because of their advanced transportation system. First, let's look at the expressways. In 2003, so the Chongqing is like an animal, here. In the first, at the beginning of 2000, they only got 3 exits out of Chongqing, but to 2008, it's got like 8 or 10 exits from Chongqing, and by 2011, it's got 20 exits or pathways out of Chongqing. Let's look at the railways. At the beginning of the new century, it only got 3 exits from Chongqing. Then by 2006, it's got 6 exits. Then by 2014, it's got 10 exits out of Chongqing. Then look at the air routes. I don't have the beginning, the data for the beginning of the new century, but even for the last 4 years, you can see there's a dramatic change, increase in the air route of Chongqing. So this diagram shows the Chongqing's connection with the better route, the transportation system. Now, from the northern bound transportation it could reach from Chongqing to Germany, and for the southern bound transportation, it can reach Singapore directly now. For both lines, it could save many days. To the Germany, it could save 37 days. To Singapore, it could save 20 days. So thanks to the advanced transportation system that has really transformed Chongqing into a transport hub, a logistic center, and a trade center of Western China, attracting the many enterprises across country to headquarters in Chongqing. So that's the first case of Chongqing. It's inland and in a sense, landlocked province in China. How could they take advantage of the one, to build up, to update their transportation system to promote the economic social development? The second case is Alibaba Taobao village. Taobao normally means is an online shop. The Taobao village, to be qualified as a Taobao village, they must this village they must have at least 10% of their household has opened online shops. So this you can see, at the in 7 years ago, there's only 3 villages in China qualified as the Taobao village. But last year, it has increased to 2,000, more than 2,000. And by 2020, Taobao village could be increased to more than 5,500. Then that could be really reduce the empty nest family in the countryside, and also could reduce the hollow villages substantially. So, and those Taobao villages also could be a pioneer of the revitalize the rural area in China. In China, the government has just launched an initiative they call the revitalize the countryside. Those Taobao villages could be really pioneers. So they use the internet. They attractive returning tenants from urban area, and also there's many industry has gone to the countryside. So the success of those Taobao villages really depend on those grassroots, the entrepreneurship, and also the Taobao company to empower local household, and also it's very much depend on the local government. They are very they play a limited but effective intervention. So that's really the second case. We wish that could really to reduce the urban and rural divide in the near future. In general, I think those social dimension of development is very important, but not necessarily the social development should be promoted through a traditional or narrow social policy sense. So it could be, but this perspective is very important. The social perspective need really mainstream into development, and also to promote there's so many uncertainty in the near future or in the non-future. I think for the international community, it's very important to establish a knowledge networking and interconnectivity to facilitate learning and adaptation. That's the main part of my presentation. Thank you.
Very much. That was fascinating, because it's when we think of the new technology, we're often focusing too much on the digital aspects, forgetting that the physical technology infrastructures are just as important in terms of roads and railways, but also power infrastructures and utility infrastructures as well, and how these are being modernized by the new technology. We think of smart electricity grids, for example, but also smart transport, smart logistics. I think they're extremely important, because when you say get rich, build roads, I think that's important, right? But we have to make sure the roads are efficient and don't pollute too much, right? And I know in China you're doing great work with moving to non-renewable power supplies as well. I think what I found interesting there also was this idea of revitalizing villages and trying to correct the big migration there is from rural to urban areas, which is a global phenomenon. And I think we need to learn some lessons from China in, for example, Africa, I think would be extremely important, because obviously development should take place locally. I mean, cities are good, of course, for certain things, but we can't all live in cities, and we have to have people living in the countryside and growing the food, of course, as well. I think it's very important to make villages and local areas in the rural context dynamic and able to generate their own wealth and their own prosperity using, for example, mobile technologies and internet, developing e-commerce. I think it's an excellent, really interesting example of how that should happen. So thank you very much for that. I'd now like to call upon the next speaker, Ms. Noor Al-Malki Al-Yahani from Qatar, who is going to talk about the International Family Institute of the Doha Fund. So thank you very much for that.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. I'd like to start first by thanking the Commission for the invitation. I'll be speaking on the interconnectivity for resilient societies with a special focus on the Arab world. In my presentation, I'd like to give you an overview of the interconnectivity in the Arab world and identify benefits and challenges that interconnectivity can bring to families and individuals, especially children, youth, and women. I also examine the opportunities and challenges that ICT's applications in education and social protection in the Arab world could bring. I'll give some examples of using ICT to advance social progress in the state of Qatar and provide some recommendations for social policy. First thing first, I think we should agree on definitions. So we're talking resilience. There are many definitions of resilience, and the one I'm adopting is the ability to anticipate risk, limit impact, recover, and bounce back from difficulties and crises, and contribute to function and grow, continue to function and grow. This applies to individuals, families, and societies. A statement I read in an article recently sums up what I want to, key message I want to make in here is that prepared people in prepared households are the first link in the chain of resilience. It's where resilience starts. We want to focus on prepared people in prepared households, and we can say in prepared families. Resilience and sustainability are not the same, but the best solutions are both resilient and sustainable. In the discussion about resilience, normally the focus on families and on individuals is lacking, so I wanted to highlight it in this discussion. So the state of ICT in the Arab world has transformed all our aspects in the region. If you look at the graph in here, there is 60% penetration of ICT in the region, 38% penetration of active social media users. Mobile subscription are very high, active mobile social users at 34%. Qatar tops the rankings worldwide in social media penetration as well as mobile social media penetration. All these ratings that we see here means that the Arab world is on the verge of a massive digital disruption. Because of that, taking in consideration all this, I'll just give you a few examples of the use of social media in the Arab world. If you look at Facebook, it's 80 million users in the region. WhatsApp is 40% of social media users in 20 countries, according to a study in 2015. Instagram has 25 million users. The Arab world is fascinated by videos on Facebook, YouTube as well. We have the second highest online video viewership, and Twitter is 45% of Arab youth between 18 and 24 are active on Twitter. Now, the Arab world, unfortunately, tells a complex story of exclusion and inequalities, and because of that, social interconnectivity can bring good to the region, but at the same time, it brings with it so many risks. Social and economic inequalities are rampant in the region. Evidence exists. Social exclusion due to poverty, unemployment, and low levels of literacy rates, increasing conflict in the region, and there is no need to talk about that. It's already in the news. Persistence of chronic poverty and high vulnerability and high unemployment. Youth in the Arab region experience prolonged transition to adulthood, characterized by waithood, where youth stay in the parents' house for a very long time because of unemployment and inability to form a family of their own. High illiteracy rates among youth reaching 16%, pervasive discrimination against women in the Arab region, weak youth engagement, and regional gender digital divide. It's the largest gender divide in internet use is in the Arab region. Now, interconnectivity brings so many advantages and benefits to families. It contributes to maintenance of family relations. It improves communication, parental engagement, child's learning, and improved capacity to support children's function. But it has some it brings with it some challenges as well. It affects family life. It's according to a survey in the Arab region in 2012, 37% of participants believed that interconnectivity is reducing family communication and cohesion, and I think this is the same in other countries as well, other regions. There is less direct personal contact. A recently finished study by our institute on Arab family strength in Qatar, Jordan, and Tunisia. Participants in the three countries cited social media as a threat to family relations. I've put some quote in here. where one participant in Tunisia talks about wanting to change the way children are using technology and going back to the old value system and kind of communication. Also, social interconnectivity brings benefits to children, support children's emotional development, level the playing field for people with special needs, enhance and strengthen relationships, and facilitate new literacies and multi-literacies in children. But also, again, it brings with it challenges, harmful physical abuse over prolonged ICT use, negative impact on social development, educational concerns related to impact on cognitive development, concern about exposure to unsuitable content over the internet, concerns related to impact on replacing normal play and activities with playing on the net, risks online, pornography, trafficking, and extremism and bullying. Interconnectivity also brings benefits to Arab youth through cyber engagements. It encourages self-expression and youth journalism. It offered new opportunities for people in the job market, diversified learning opportunities, promoted youth activism, which we all remember in 2011, the Arab Spring was incited or started through the use of interactive technology. According to the Arab Human Development Report in 2016, youth in the Arab region are more educated, more connected, and more mobile than ever before. But Arab youth face challenges using ICTs. Entrepreneurs find it very difficult because of bureaucratic procedures and lack of access to funds. Entrepreneurship in incubation in the region is very limited. Arab youth face, including young women, are at risk of being radicalized through the internet. There's a lack of Arabic content, and the content that's available is somehow mostly dominated by traditional stereotypes. Censorship in the region is very high. The social media as well has the risk of alienating people from their own culture and family relations. Huge benefits of interconnectivity to women. It catalyzes a broader gender equality through social, economic, and political dimensions. It increases productivity, access to new markets, improve women's education in the region, help them to find better jobs, and contribute to the innovation in the economy. Also enhance their potential in and internet because of affordability of access. Internet in some countries are the cost is very high. Sociocultural and gender stereotypes content still reinforces traditional stereotypes about women. Digital literacy, women and men alike don't have the digital literacy to access the internet, lack of confidence in social media. All that limits how women benefit from social media. Yesterday, we heard in the panel discussion the benefits that interconnectivity brought to social protection through the presentations of Costa Rica and Egypt, where they gave us examples of how the use of interconnectivity and ICT helped to reshape the social protection system. It's a powerful tool to manage facilitate beneficiary identification and targeting, and enhance design and implementation, improve system mechanism, and it also provides convenience. But there are challenges. There are unreliable infrastructure, weak business processes in the region, weak staff capacity, lack of national ID system, lack of inadequate budget, lack of legal and regulatory frameworks. Education, use of interconnectivity in education brings huge benefits to the region. It transformed both teaching and learning, and the use of massive online open courses provides opportunity for young men and women in the region. Cell phones and apps removed barriers to education of refugee children around the world, and unfortunately, Arabs are the highest population of refugees. Challenges to leveraging education in the education sector is related to widening regional disparities because of the existing gap in the region, a lack of a public investment, and high costs of using ICTs in education. In the Arab world, the use of ICT in education lags behind its use in other economic spheres, in communication, and in employment. I'd like to give some examples of interconnectivity for social progress from Qatar, although there are so many examples in the region. In Qatar, there is very high connectivity. The e-government portal, for instance, provides more than 1,380 digital services. Some 690 of them can be accessed and executed by companies, citizens, and residents, and it's very mobile friendly for people with disabilities. It also includes special pages for migrant workers in 5 languages. Also, the government established an assistive technology center called MEDA in 2010 to connect and empower people with disability through ICT use, focusing on education, employment, and community engagement. Recently, or actually it was in 2016, an app called Accessible Qatar was launched. It's used to help the disabled community view and determine accessibility of public and touristic locations, and this app won a World Summit Award in 2016 for promoting the rights of people with disability, and it's making the change in Qatar, advocating for accessibility for people with disabilities. There's a digital parenting program, is another example done by, called Amantak Digital Safety, and it was launched as a social responsibility initiative in 2014 by Vodafone Qatar. And it's supposed to make it translate into safe tech world for parents and for children, and it focuses on awareness, education, and technical supports, and provides workshop for parents and for children, and provides as well a digital parents guide where it gives information about safety on the net, essential checklists for parents of children at any age. A third example, which transcends Qatar, is the Silatek program. Silatek is an international social initiative based in Qatar that works to create jobs and expand economic opportunities for young Arabs. It currently has programs in 16 Arab countries, including Algeria, Egypt, Iraq, Jordan, Lebanon, Oman, Morocco, Palestine, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, Somalia, Sudan, Syria, Tunisia, Yemen, and Comoros. By the end of the first quarter of 2017, Silatek succeeded in connecting more than 300,000 young Arabs to real opportunities, job opportunities. CELATEC works on achieving its mandate through the support of the State of Qatar. In 2012, it's launched a portal facilitating job opportunities and training. It's called A'mal. I'd like to conclude by giving some recommendations for social policy. And the first one is focusing on building family and social capital to enhance societal resilience by developing policies and programs that support relationship building, emphasize trust, reciprocity, and community engagement, and adopt measures to address internet and social media addiction. And I would like to just highlight that if we look at all the news when we see a catastrophe, remember it's the first responders are the parents, the families. They come first, and this is where we need to focus. 2, strengthen the resilience of society by promoting inclusiveness and overcoming social exclusion and inequalities and engaging people in decision-making. Raise awareness of the benefits and potential risk interconnectivity could bring to the individuals, to families and communities, and enhance the parental skills, parental ICT skills, and build capacity among professionals on e-safety to protect children and young people. 4, integrate gender in national ICT strategies and policies to build awareness and capacity of e-government officials on gender issues. Like the previous panelists yesterday, I'd like to highlight that gender equality should be at the center of everything. Without gender equality, the SDGs will not be achieved. 5th recommendation is to increase investment in education and prioritize spending on most marginalized groups and focus on increasing equity, inclusion, and support to most marginalized groups and disadvantaged children by promoting innovative forms of education. Support integration of ICT in the social protection sector and emphasize that its achievement results from coordination and political will. Rather, it's not a technical fix. Build national capacity on the enabling role of innovation and ICTs in social and sustainable development, and place innovation and ICT at the center of national and regional social policies. Finally, promote reporting on efforts at the national and regional levels related to innovation and ICTs and the SDGs, and facilitate further UN reporting on innovation and ICTs. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you, Noor. That was a really tour de force. Excellent presentation. Really a microcosm of all the different issues, I think, which, okay, maybe not all, but many, a very large number of the issues which we need to confront here. And I think I recognize, I know a little bit about the Arab region, but I obviously come from Europe, and I recognize all those problems you talked about there. Of course, we should also remember when we're talking about society and technology that context is so important. Context and culture, they're really critical. But I don't think that means we can't learn from each other, and we can't also have regional and global strategies and coordination about what we're doing. And I think many of the examples you gave can certainly be used in that context, and how difficult it is to balance the benefits with the challenges. And that does mean that we need to have a very sensitive, culturally, contextually tuned social policy. But that social policy must be closely linked to broader policies, economic and technical and cultural policies as well, of course, right? So it's a complex area, but I think your examples have really put the finger on many of the critical issues which we have to discuss. So I thank you for that. So I'd like now to turn to the next speaker, Walter Valdivia, Senior Fellow of the Arizona State Institute, State University. So, sir, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Jeremy, Chairman and Secretary, for this invitation to be part of this panel. Jeremy just mentioned the beautiful presentation on NOR as a tour de force, so my ambitions will have to be much more modest. The first notion that I'd like to convey to this room in relation to the subject at hand, interconnectivity, the digital technologies and development, is the awareness that there is a mindset about digital technologies that could be represented as imagining an unqualified good emanating from them, and that many governments, non-governmental organizations, businesses, large corporations, and even small businesses have purchased this way of thinking. Thankfully, nobody in the panel, of course, embraces this view, but so it's not a direct observation of anything said on this table, but this position is to believe that simply expanding access to digital technologies and the internet will promote development, and many good things for society will come out of it. Well, I think it's partly true, but let me talk about the part that is not so quite correct, which is, at the beginning, Jeremy noted that technologies are in some way neutral, he said, because we, societies, decide what to do and what to make out of them. That is correct, and the situation is a bit more complex. About 4 decades of science and technology studies tell us that technologies are really embedded in social systems in a way that they shape mutually each other. We call it co-production. And the notion is that as we shape our technological world, we are also shaping our social order. And as the values of society evolve, they evolve in trajectories that have to do a lot with the technologies that we adopt. So, in a way, an uncritical adoption of technologies shapes our societal values, the way we interact with each other, the way we participate in political activity, the way we participate in the markets, in a particular way. This is particularly true of technologies and the market. We would assume that the private sector has the lion's share in technological development. But at the same time, markets are configured by the very technologies that emerge, particularly when we are talking about technologies of a high impact for productive platforms, what economists call general purpose technologies. They emerge as new productive platforms that transform not only their original industries, but a whole array of economies in a new way. And these arrangements give birth to a new market arrangements. So this co-production that I started speaking is quite visible in the way markets are shaped and rearranged by the emergence of technologies, and that is, of course, the case in the digital world, where we see increasingly that certain players, the first movers in specific domains, whether this be search engines or social media, quickly ascend to be hegemonic in their space. This is very important to keep in mind when we think about 2 elements of sustainability or transversal categories relevant to sustainability and resilience in development. One important transversal category for thinking of resilience and sustainability is, of course, inequality. So something particularly interesting of technological development is that it does promote certainly economic growth. But it seems that economic growth goes hand in hand when it's promoted by technological change with increasing inequality. We wonder how this is happening. How is that we must accept the trade-off between having a vibrant, innovative economy and increasing inequality. But the reason is that, again, technologies are baked in the way economies evolve, and the structures within the economies in which these technologies come to be adopted and implemented have already inequality baked in them. So technological advancement occurs as it's a perhaps exacerbating factor of existing economic power structures. So this is important to notice when we think of the mentality that I described at the beginning of the unqualified goodness of access to the internet or to digital economies. Because maybe in that mindset, we could be actually enhancing the structures that perpetuate inequalities in the economy and perhaps beyond it as well. So the question is, of course, a tricky one. How are we to embrace technological development and innovation in a way that reconfigures those arrangements, such as market arrangements, as well as all the other more fuzzy and difficult to grasp or measure cultural and social arrangements, in a way that we can promote greater equity or more participation? It's a tricky question because, as I'm saying, it seems that in our history we have of economic development, we have benefited from technologies that expand inequality by reinforcing the structures of distribution already in place. So a tricky question, of course, is a call for the imagination. And the answer is to imagine new ways of governing these socio-technical systems. Admit and acknowledge that technological development is not extricable from economic and social development. Recognize that there are embedded structures that combine social development with technological development, and imagine new ways of creating this or shaping this partnership. Perhaps in an aspirational way, hope that societies can, to some extent, steer the development of these socio-technical systems in directions that are more consonant with the values of these societies. Perhaps what I'm proposing is to imagine forms of the governance of innovation that are more consonant with democratic values, more consonant with our aspirations of inclusiveness. And while this is, of course, positing the question and suggesting that the answer is in new imaginations of the governance of innovation, we could recognize at least the contours of that new governance of innovation. And one of the key elements will be at the center of what I'm discussing, which is permit that technological advancement and innovation is more inclusive, at least in critical junctures of development. And to be more inclusive, what we need to do is envision a governance of innovation that opens up spaces for that inclusive participation. Something that has been the exclusive domain of experts, to begin with scientists, engineers, and corporate boards. It may be more productively used or shaped if some critical spaces in the design of innovation are open for public participation and engagement. Another element in envisioning this new governance of innovation is, of course, the way in which we measure progress. And this is important because the way we measure growth and the way we measure technological advancement and development and the way we do our national accounts becomes, of course, implicated in the very structures that will consolidate those pre-existing arrangements. When I was talking about inequality as being exacerbated perhaps by the society's embracing technological development, we should realize that also our way of measuring economic growth and economic activity may be implicated in the same game. Innovations in, therefore, national accounts, all the way to accountability of public-private partnerships to the bureaucracy may be at the key of envisioning this new governance of innovation. And so, having gone from very detailed and nuanced presentations on the Far East and the Middle East, I wanted to offer these more general thoughts to perhaps shape a bit the discussion, if not with a discordant opinion, at least with some caveats to that mindset of the unqualified good of digital access.
Thank you very much for that. I enjoyed that because it's. I like to philosophize a little bit sometimes and a bit of philosophy, but grounded in the real practical issues we're confronting, I think is very important. And trying to unpick what is driving technology. As I said at the beginning, it's not really neutral, it's socially embedded and driven by the market very often, and that's really, really important. But I also liked the way that you started to think about new forms of innovation, how we innovate in society, not just the technology, but innovate our social policies and our society generally. And of course, there's a whole lot of work and examples in this area, like social innovation, open innovation, as you well know, I'm sure, frugal innovation, inclusive innovation, all these issues which precisely try to grapple with some of the points that you made there, more or less successfully. But I think also the point you made about measurement and how because someone once said, and I don't really think I agree with this, but if you can't measure it, it doesn't exist. I think we should try harder, in other words, because it does exist. But there's a lot of work done on social impact measurement, of course, and looking at the long term, because a lot of measurement is done very short term, right? And also thinking about other forms of measuring welfare, for example, not just GDP, but there's a country, is it Nepal? I can't remember. Bhutan that has a happiness index, right? And in Scandinavia, we always say that we're the happiest countries in the world. And we have high tech, and we're not driven too much by the market. So there are examples out there. Okay, so sorry, I'm going on too long, because this is an interesting discussion. So thank you, sir. I would like now to call upon our next speaker, distinguished speaker, Professor Maria Garrido from Washington University. University of Washington, I should say. The other way around. Sorry, okay, that's what it says here. Okay,
thank you very much. Well, first of all, thank you for the incredible invitation and the opportunity to share with all these honorable speakers, and thank you to all of you for being here. And we live in unprecedented times in many fronts, the technological, the social, the political, unprecedented negatively and positively as well, right? But those unprecedented times, if we think about innovation, resilience, sustainability, right? The three key themes of the panel and the discussion today, those three are dependent upon an enabling environment, and borrow from Ms. Donna's words, an enabling environment that allows people to think differently, right? The freedom to think differently, the freedom to question aspects of our society and our ideas. The freedom to share and co-create is critical for that. And in the context of this, access to information from a rights-based approach plays a very important role as we think of our future and the future of technology, innovation, and social development. So within this, as many of you know, access to information for the first time has been codified in the UN 2030 agenda, part of 16.10, where public access to information is called as one of the targets of the Sustainable Development Goals, and information as such is mentioned in 16 other targets. So apparently it's important, it is important. So how can access to information create more socially and economically inclusive societies? We have an unprecedented ability today in many countries, not all, in many communities, not all, it is true, but we have an unprecedented ability to create, to share, to talk to each other, to exchange information. How do we capitalize on this ability, maximize that potential to work towards reducing inequalities, to work towards reducing poverty and open opportunity for youth, promote more transparent and accountable governments, and promote civic life in our communities? So, from this perspective, I'd like to invite many of you, all of us, to think about access to information as the rights and capacity to use, create, and share information in ways that are meaningful to each individual, community, and organization. It's a rights-based approach where creating and accessing has an enabling environment, as I said before, where freedom is guaranteed, and freedom in different levels and in different contexts, and freedom also the capabilities, right? People, the ability to be able to participate in these different environments. There are three aspects of public access to information that I'd like to bring home today, where social policies can play an important role. Social policies play a role in all the different dimensions that affect access to information, from the infrastructure to the social context, to the legal context, and also to the capabilities community context. I'd like just to call these three out, not because they are the most important, all of them are important. Affordability, number one, key is key for access, and it's key for people to participate in the digital world in a more productive way. As all of you know, 45% of the world is currently connected online. This is data from 2016. The new data just came up last week. 80% of the people of the world are covered by a 3G network. So we have the ability today to connect 80% of the people in the world, yet only 40% are included, 45% are included. And it has to do with affordability, right? So in this context, how can social policies help make mobile services more affordable? How can we use other spaces where this public access to information, communication, and the technologies they promote can happen in a different space, for example, in public libraries. And I will leave that to Ms. Donna again. I'll just mention briefly, public libraries and social organizations in many parts of the world play a very important role in providing this access to many communities, especially communities who have been ignored, abandoned, or simply not covered by private corporations, by telecommunications companies. They play a very important role not only from the point of view of access, they play an important role for the point of view of a social space where access is contextualized in the community, socialized, where access comes with training, and also the space for communities to come together. Social policies in support of this access are critical. Community mobile networks is another very interesting initiative from community cooperatives that similarly have been left outside the coverage, where they have been able to get a concession from the government, and this has been the case of Mexico, Argentina, Indonesia, Philippines, and other examples. The one that you see there is Rizomatica in Mexico, where it's a cooperative-based approach to mobile network. And it's an important step towards ownership of the technology by the community. It's also an important step, and I don't remember which one was the speaker who mentioned, as a means to bring wealth creation also to the communities and spur jobs. I believe it was Ms. Noor that spoke about that. So that's the social policies in relationship to making affordability a reality. Second one that also Ms. Noor discussed, the gender gap, the ICT gender gap is imperative. We know today 40%, only 40% of women in less developed countries are participating online compared to 80% of women in more advanced countries, more developed countries. I'm sorry for using advanced. Reducing this gap is critical. How can social policies help in support of gender equality? And when I speak about gender equality, I speak of gender in intersectionality. It's not only about men, women, and other genders. It's about women, men, other genders, and aspects of power and intersection, race, income, education, different aspects that come into play for women to participate more fully in the digital world. For example, from the access, skills, and leadership front. Once again, the role of social spaces and social policy that support these social spaces so they can reach out to more people, so they can reach out to women and bring them to those spaces for access and training. Policies that promote women in STEM careers, moving away from counting just women using technologies to counting how women design and create technologies. Today, only 20% of women are part of that world of software engineers. That is very important. Third, using, and I think it was Ms. Noor that also discussed this, the importance of different learning platforms like MOOCs and coding bootcamps, not only learning platforms, learning approaches and training approaches to be able to offer women that perhaps don't have the opportunity to pursue an STEM career, technical training. And that has already starting to be documented. Women in South Africa, in Philippines, and in Colombia participating in MOOCs to be able to gain computer science knowledge and leadership knowledge, areas where they don't have a big participation. And then strategic partnerships. And I'm sure many of you are aware of the Equals Partnership, which is a partnership between UN Women, ITU, the UN University in Macau, and other organizations like GSMA and other social organizations. They are trying, it's a coalition that is trying to advance policies and programs to improve the role of women from those three, access, skills, and leadership. I borrow those three from that. Very important, the promotion of partnerships. And lastly, and as I said before, and I like to once again quote my colleague Donna Schieder, innovation, social and technological, is dependent on the freedom to think differently. Is dependent on the freedom to question, to voice those differences, to co-create, to share. As we see, social policies in the support of freedom are absolutely necessary given the political context that we live today. In 2016, and this is data for Freedom House, an incredible organization that collects this data year by year, 60% of internet users live in countries where people were arrested, imprisoned for posting online on political, social, or religious issues. We cannot forget that access and the fact that we're able to use it means that people can use it freely, and that's a very important aspect of social policies moving forward that we need to keep in mind. Of course, with the sensitivities, with the political sensitivities in place, granted different political contexts. Another important aspect of this, 49% of users live in countries where people have been attacked or killed by online activities. This is, I'm sorry for the very poor visual. This is freedom on the net that you see in that graph. Increased access has no guarantee that increase of freedom. Social policies that support that are absolutely necessary, and the work of many organizations, including IFLA, the TAP network that I'm sure there are representatives here, the APC, Association for Progressive Communication, they have kept the finger on this very important point, the importance of net neutrality, data security and privacy, the right to be forgotten, many different aspects of social policies that need to guarantee that freedom to think differently remains there, so innovation can actually have an effect on a broader community. And since I have one more minute, because I did great with my time, I'd like to indulge myself, if you allow me, to one more thing that I didn't include, and it's how do we use that innovation that we have today to know more about the world? We need better data. Big data, the promises of big data are still far from what we need. We need to know about people in order for those social policies to make sense for people. We have only 65 countries today that collect data on women and their use of ICT. only 65 countries in the world. And that's only one example of many of these aggregations. If we truly want to think about innovation from a technological point of view, resilience and social development, and also to honor the foundation of the UN 2030 Agenda, everybody counts. We need to make everybody count. Thank you. Oh, sorry.
Okay, thank you. That was a wonderful, because I think what you've done, this is someone must have planned this, but this progression of presentations is turning out to be very fortuitous, because we've had some very good expositions of different aspects, and now we're getting some real concrete proposals for solutions which actually work as well. I mean, we also had some from Noor and the other speakers as well as, and from China as well, I know. But this is important, because we're talking about an issue here which is so complex, but so important. And some of the examples you presented to us are really concrete, and they work. I know that from my own experience as well, and you do as well. So I think that's really important. And just two quick things I'd like to comment on, because the use of public libraries as centres for IT access, training and availability, I think is very, very important. And it's funny because the role of libraries is changing dramatically, and I know the next speaker is going to be talking about that as well. But in some ways, I think it's going back to what libraries ought to be. Repositories or places where you could access knowledge and information and actually communicate with other people and actually co-create together. That, I think, was probably, and I'll be corrected shortly if I'm wrong, one of the original ideas, right? And I think with the IT revolution and the need for all the aspects which Maria talked about, I think that's coming about. But also, just finally, I've got a problem, and maybe this discussion can help me later on. I've just finished some research for the European Commission on what they call fab labs, fabrication labs. This is where you combine 3D printing with IT and startups and working with new data. And only 20% of those fab labs across Europe are run by women, which is about what you'd expect on par, unfortunately. But both from independent and self-reporting, the impact of those women was much greater than the impact of men, in terms not just the social aspects, but also the economic aspects and the environmental aspects. Now, I hate to say this, I'm struggling to explain that. I know that men and women do different things, but they also do many similar things. So why is it that women who lead these sorts of activities do much better than men? There's probably a range of different solutions.
It's our nurturing nature.
I'm sure that's part of it, yeah. It may be that because there are so few women that dare go into this highly technical field, that those that do go in are really high caliber. I don't know. And whereas the men tend to be average. That may be one thing, but I'm sure you're right. Women are much more able to, at least this stage of our development, I think, to nurture and to take account of everybody's needs and actually see the big picture as well. So maybe I'm doing the male sex a disservice, but anyway, I'd like to discuss this maybe later, also over a drink afterwards if necessary. So, okay, thank you, and now I better move on before I get told off by the chair. Last but not least, Ms. Donna Shida, President of the International Federation of Library Associations and Institutions in the US, I guess, right?
No.
Sorry.
We are a global
international
organization.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Okay, over to you.
Thank you very much, and I want to thank everyone who was involved in inviting me here to speak on this panel. I spent many hours up in that gallery during the development of the SDGs, thinking about all the things I would say to the delegates if I ever got a chance to, as I'm sure many people up there are thinking about now. So it is a real privilege for me to be able to speak to you today. We've heard a lot about infrastructure and connectivity, but those are only the first steps towards bridging the digital divide. What I'm going to talk about today really is how we produce information literate citizens. and what part of the infrastructure that already exists in many countries are there to help put humanity into the technology and to keep humanity into the technology. My message today is simple. There is no truly sustainable development without access to information and no meaningful, inclusive access to information without libraries. IFLA is proud to have represented the world's libraries in the 2030 Agenda negotiations and to have brought a viewpoint which UN member states have recognized that access to information supports development. 19 SDG targets specifically talk about the need to access information, but every target really is dependent in one way or another on access to information. To begin the advocacy campaign, IFLA launched the Lyon Declaration on Access to Information and Development. Over 570 organizations and institutions from across the library, the development, and technology sectors signed it and supported us in our work at the UN. It sets out the principles behind access to information and is really the why of what we're doing here. Why is technology important to us? What do we want it to achieve? We want people to be able to exercise civil, political, economic, and social rights. We want them to learn and apply new skills. We want them to make decisions and participate in an active and engaged civil society. We want to ensure transparency, accountability, good governance, and empowerment. And we want to measure the progress on public and private commitments on sustainable development. In the main body of the Declaration, we had laid out how we saw the entire relationship between access and development. So first, we recognize the multidimensional nature of poverty, which is at the core of efforts at the United Nations. But there is, of course, an aspect of poverty that we as librarians are very concerned about, and that is information poverty, which is not talked about enough. And as my colleague has told you, according to the World Economic Forum, more than 4 billion people, mostly in developing countries, still do not have access to the internet. That means that over half the world's population is missing out on the life-changing benefits of connectivity, from financial services to health and education. There is also a gender gap in internet access, as well as mobile phone ownership and digital skills. The internet access gap is growing worldwide and is highest in Africa. If we ignore the need to bridge the information poverty gap, we get caught in a negative downward spiral. Efforts to promote connectivity stall, and even where there is an option, there is little interest in an internet dominated by content from a few corners of the world. As a social policy, encouraging the development of local content for the internet in native languages in your countries is extremely important to demonstrating the value for those citizens to be connected. The law cracks down on free speech. Copyright limits fair use of works in this negative scenario. Education and training fails to ready students for the information society, and there are no options for them to have a second chance as adults. The digital divide between rich and poor, men and women, urban and rural, high and low skilled, becomes an information and knowledge divide. This becomes a development divide, with large segments of our communities unable to benefit from the latest innovations, to participate in cultural life, or to ensure the well-being of themselves and their families. Decisions are guided at best by ignorance, and at worst by misinformation and lies. And we only have to look around to the newscasts of today to see exactly how that is playing out in some of our societies. Development happens for some, but not for everyone, and we fail to achieve the 2030 Agenda. So, what we're talking about here today is how we can act to avoid this, because inaction is not an option. Action will result in positive outcome. Not only will growing numbers of people enjoy the possibility of internet access, but there is enough locally relevant content in their own language for them to want to connect. When they get online, they can become confident users. They are information literate, meaning they not only have access to the internet and to the information on it, but they know what to do with it. Achieving information literacy, as well as just literacy in your country, is an extremely important social policy for you to pursue in order that access to information serves everyone equally and that there is equity. People can create their own information and knowledge, which they share with their families, communities, and countries. There's a virtuous circle. They use this to improve well-being and not only fulfilling traditional roles more effectively, but creating new activities. Information travels across borders, and this is an extremely important social policy that is a global social policy, not just a national social policy, which you must work together to achieve. Enabling research collaborations that make new headway in tackling the grand challenges of our days, as well as the rare diseases previously seen as untreatable. This positive scenario is also a scenario that an effective library system can help deliver. Libraries have unique attributes. As public institutions, they are dedicated to serving their communities without commercial motivation. They are often the only public space in the community where all can come together. As such, they can be a space for civic engagement. For example, in Colombia, where library programs have helped bring communities back together. They can also be a space for programs to close the gender gap. Myanmar Public Library's Tech Age Girls program develops leadership skills while providing technology training to young women. Public internet access in libraries is also key for those who cannot afford, as Maria was discussing, or who do not see value in their own connection. But even when there are other options, libraries still have value. Compared to other environments such as internet cafes, they offer a safe space for women and for looking for often sensitive information, such as about health. Some argue that as home internet use grows, that in libraries will decline, but the evidence suggests that they go hand in hand, with countries like Finland and Denmark showing high use of both home connections and library ones. With a strong focus on responding to the needs of their users, they know how to make information useful. They work with partners to develop programs and develop new services that can deliver everything from literacy classes to agricultural market information to citizens. Libraries are also staffed with dedicated professionals who regularly go from organizing coding clubs to simply offering the answers and encouragement necessary to help a user feel confident online. Libraries do everything from turning complicated data sets into easy-to-use guides to establishing maker spaces. They help make access meaningful to people. Libraries are an essential part of the information ecosystem, and they bridge the digital divide. With their mandate to acquire, preserve, and give access to information, they are essential to innovation. To quote the 2017 Development and Access to Information report, access to information is not an end in itself, but rather a driver of progress across the board. It empowers people and communities, laying the foundation for equity, sustainability, and prosperity. And as I stated at the beginning of this talk, there is no truly sustainable development without access to information, and no meaningful, inclusive, equitable access to information without libraries. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Donna. That was really insightful and very, very useful, because we often forget when we, and I'm guilty maybe more than anybody, talk about some of these really advanced technologies like AI and other things. We have to start at the bottom sometime in many countries, but we have to make sure that one thing leads to another as well. And I think libraries for me are an excellent example of sort of intermediary safe space where people who want to know and but need help and don't have the resources to do it themselves can come. But I did some research on this some years ago, and what struck me was, although we're talking about information technology and access to IT and going on the internet, actually libraries are places of physical contact and human interaction, and it blends the two together perfectly, because you're interacting globally with someone around the world or a family member who lives somewhere in some other country, but you're also talking to the person sitting next to you and having coffee with them and talking to the staff. And I think that just encapsulates what's so important here, that we mix, we talk about blended learning. This is blended digital and physical, if you like, or whatever the word is. So I think this is very important, and it's really critical in the terms of social development and social cohesion, of course. A library, being a centre, can bring a community together unlike anything else, when it's free from commercial constraints. So I think that's really important. But okay, now we've come to the end of, how many was it? 5 excellent presentations. And the opportunity now is to have a fantastic debate with the people from the floor. And I know that there are several delegates from national representatives who want to make a statement or ask a question. So I'd invite you to press your button now. And I think we have the honourable representative from Argentina who wishes to make a statement or ask a question. It's also Buki. Is Argentina? Oh, there you are. Sorry,
Yes.
I couldn't see.
No.
The floor is yours. It's also.
Thanks. Muchas gracias.
Thank you very much, Mr. Moderator, and I thank the panelists for their interesting presentations. In recent years, the challenge of innovation and technology have acquired notable relevance in work processes. It is also necessary to say that these contribute substantially to social development. Innovation and interconnectivity facilitate the provision of public services and strengthen institutions, generating areas of interaction which are more efficient between the government and society. Argentina has advanced in interconnectivity and the electronic government with a view to automatization of government functions and services for citizens. In recent years, we have unified channels to the public in a single website, argentina.gov.ar. In December 2017, we had more than 60 organizations which facilitated citizens' paperwork. Furthermore, technology and innovation permitted facilitating many procedures and generated greater equity in education or employment. For instance, with university and secondary titles, avoiding 300,000 people avoiding traveling to Buenos Aires to go in person for the legalization procedures. Argentina has also undertaken digital literacy, helping vulnerable women. In line with the national digital inclusion, we have trained 30,000 people, the titles for employment, for women who are in situations of violence. Innovation and computerization are a great help for the implementation and planning of social policy. In Argentina, the National Directorate, CINTIS, coordinates exchange of information between natural and legal persons and the government. Through the network of CINTRIX, we have defined, updated, and enriched data based on data crossovers with other organizations in the network. This allowed organizations to verify permanence of titles of social programs. As well as this, there were social programs, family allowances, pensions, labor relationships and scholarships are on the network. There is also the programs of science and technology and innovation for sustainable development created in 2016. This has produced innovative technologies which offer targeted solutions to specific problems. This is what Argentina is developing. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. That's useful to add your experience to what we've already heard. But I mean, it's a new dimension. Also focusing very much on the social programs and family relationships, making people aware of what they are and providing access to them in a much more user-friendly way, if you like, and not having to travel such a long way to do it, but to get the basic information. I think that's really an important issue, which were part of the policy package, which we need to look at. So I would like now to call upon the Honourable Representative from Germany to make a statement or ask a question. Sir, the floor is yours.
Is it working? Thank you very much, Mr. Moderator. Ladies and gentlemen, Germany aligns itself with the EU statement, of course, which will still follow. We thank the Secretariat for the rich and inspirational note on this topic, because it delineates correctly the relevant developments in the complex field of interaction between humans and technology. It is actually important to underline this notion of human agency. We shape the future of work and society. It does not simply happen. Broad and diverse discourse, such as ours today, is essential to involve all stakeholders in bringing about the future we want. It is also important to recall that the degree to which digital structural change can provide inclusive and sustainable growth will significantly depend on how well we manage the digital transformation in our labor markets. Actually, against this background, Germany has conducted a broad dialogue process on the future of work. It consisted of workshops with experts from academia and businesses, a political dialogue with social partners, as well as a public consultation. We would like to highlight the following insights from that process. First, social partnership is a success factor today and tomorrow, and we need an open debate that includes society as a whole. Then, as regards investment in skills, to avoid job polarization, substantial investment in skills provision at all levels of the education system is required to enable workers to make their way in the digital transformation. As a third point, transitions across different types of employment and non-employment will increase. This requires adapting our social protection systems, and a crucial part in this is a more preventive approach to labor market policy, responding also to these transitions. And last but not least, one-size-fits-all regulation will be less effective in increasingly diverse labor markets. We need to support innovation at the firm level, for instance, by creating regulatory space for new social partner-led models of work organization. We agree with the note in stating that we experience a profound and lasting change in the world. Germany would therefore encourage the UN and other member states to take this high-level panel discussion as a starting point for further debates. We must shape the envisaged transformation in a sustainable way, aiming at more inclusive and sustainable economies and societies in line with the 2030 agenda. The note actually mentions correctly that the risks and opportunities faced by men and women are today still unequally apportioned in many areas, such as digital participation, work schemes, distribution of care work, and technological advances. Germany contributes to efforts to ensure that political decisions are made on the basis of gender-related numbers and facts to strengthen a gender mainstream policy-making process to reach real gender equality. And finally, we would like to ask a question to Professor Maria Garrido. Based on your research and your experiences, what do you consider the key skills people, women and men, would need in the future? Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for that very useful intervention, and I'm really interested in the recommendations you made there. So, Maria, you have a question? Would you like to?
Sure. You want me to answer now?
Yeah, please. Yeah.
Thank you very much. I'm sorry, sir. I couldn't understand. I'm half deaf. I couldn't understand your name. Very nice to meet you. Thank you for your question. It's a very, it seems a straightforward question, but it is not. I think that the relevant skills really depends on people's aspiration for the future. I do believe that in a continuum of skills, the basic level skills, like Ms. Donna, information literacy is critical. Mobile literacy is critical. We're in a world where many people are coming and experiencing the digital world through their mobile devices with very different affordances than a PC or other means. And I think that will be important not only for now, but for the future as well. I do believe the technical, more advanced training, perhaps in the lines of programming, even though it's not the future for everybody, it may help women and girls and kids as they move forward to the labor force in the future to develop other types of skills like analytical and logic skills that may contribute for them, especially for women and other groups that might not be represented in that industry, to be able to participate more fully in the design of technology. In that continuum. Sorry for the very generic question, but it's such a difficult...
May I add something else? I think the red. I think one of the most important aspects of this, though, is being committed to continuous learning. Because whatever skills you have now, 10 years from now, the way technology changes and changes our lives, you're going to have to learn new ones. So a commitment to continuous learning and having access to learning platforms so that you can continually learn is going to be incredibly important.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think that's really useful. Lifelong learning, or whatever we want to call it, right? Just one other point. I think the representative from Germany mentioned transitions, and I think that's also between different sectors. Of course, people have to change the work they do as the economy develops and the technology comes along, and we know that many of the jobs that our children are going to be doing don't exist yet. So that's very important. But also in relation to work-life balance, transitioning between your private life, your family life and work, I think is very important, because if it really is the case that there's going to be less work available, I don't really believe that, but maybe in some areas there will be. We need also to be able to transition to being independent persons in society who can make a contribution, whether it's through voluntary work or it's through the family or community or whatever, using the new tools. And so that life is not just about work, it's also about family and social development, of course. And so the interrelationship between those things, I think, is something which is being really affected by these new technologies. And that's a very important aspect to look at, those sorts of transitions and balances which we need to have. Okay, I think I would now like to call upon His Excellency the Vice President of Costa Rica to make a statement or ask a question. Where are you, sir or madam? Sorry.
Right here.
Oh, sorry. Yeah.
Buenas tardes.
Good afternoon. Social development implies developing the human capital in today's society. And that means that we have to invest on training and provide proper opportunities under equal conditions. Clearly, in this globalized world, where there's been so many changes, both in life and in society, it is up to us to adapt quickly and enhance technology and communication for this purpose. Using technology and taking advantage of it is necessary for states, and it's the road to prosperity, and we have to follow that road. In Costa Rica, we're making progress in this respect. For instance, the Global Innovation Index of 2016 positioned the country as the second most innovative country in Latin America. Only Chile is ahead of us. We have developed strategies to use innovation in the service of persons, equitable access to science and technology, providing solutions which are innovative for all these problems. For instance, we have supported an increase in robotics for development, and my country was a proud host of the first World Olympics for robotics in 2014. And this event took place in a different latitude than Asia or the Middle East, and for the first time. And we have also used the Index of Social Progress so that we can know what stage we are at from the point of view of interconnectivity and crime, and we can measure this, which is fundamental for our work, and we have implemented human talent. We have worked on to the horizon for the future, and we've used Internet as a tool for development and to claim human rights. We have a digital strategy, and we have considerably reduced the digital divide with a view that the new technologies are effectively within reach of everyone. And as part of this strategy, we have a program of connective households which provide Internet to the poorest people in our country. Thanks to this program, we have improved the percentage of poor households with Internet, which went from 40% in 2015 to 4% to 30% in 2017. With this, we have new opportunities for millions of people, breaking the exclusion, which was when you are not connected. As states, it is up to us to meet the challenges of the future and use technology so that more people can improve their lives. This is our ethical mandate, namely to give our advantages and our talent a human face with solidarity, so that people who are faced with inequality and injustice can combat that. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that. Costa Rica is well known for being innovative and far-reaching, and it's interesting to hear the statements you made there, and particularly with a strong emphasis on empowerment of the poorest people to improve their own lives, in partnership, of course, with the government and the private sector, but empowering them to do things for themselves and putting a human face on what you're doing. I think that's really, really important in this context. So thank you for that. I would now like to ask His Excellency Minister from Haiti. Oh, there you are. Sorry, Madam. The floor is yours.
Mr. Chairman, the Republic of Haiti agrees with the statement made by Egypt on behalf of the Group of 77 and China. And taking the floor for the first time, may I first of all congratulate you, Mr. Chairman, as well as the members of the Bureau on your elections. You can be assured of the full support of my delegation and our full cooperation for fruitful debate and constructive work throughout this 56th session of the Commission for Social Development. Mr. Chairman, quite rightly, this has been one of the major objectives of sustainable development, and it is thought that for the process which has undertaken since the establishment of it, it should continue to be something which is given pride of place and explicitly included in the objectives of full employment. In this vein, my delegation is convinced that the implementation diligently and coordinated manner of the development programs for after 2015 is a major imperative which we should owe to future and present generations. The search for innovative and practical solutions which might have an effect should also be tirelessly exploited, and we need to have training in order to have true global citizenship where there might be economic and social, cultural, and political exchanges in order to increase participation and help in the potential of the collective world. Mr. Chairman, since the arrival in power of President Maurice, we have been seeing the establishment in an accelerated manner of a whole series of measures and programs for social protection for the most vulnerable strata of our population in order to combat the scourges of extreme poverty, especially to combat hunger and the lack of decent living in the rural areas. So we could quote from the technological point of view the establishment of a unique system for benefits. Every mother has the right to a minimum solidarity level if she has children of school age. This benefit can, in certain conditions, help those people who are suffering from disabilities or who are older. There are also programs to take care of children in centers, and there are also other centers for public and private care. Evaluation of the core program support for students, which has support given by the state for pupils and students by connecting them with performance measures. The concept of a system of professional involvement for children which are on the street, areas of centers for integration of children who need to avail themselves of customs if they live near the border. And this in cooperation with the Dominican Republic, Juanamed, Osapit, and Malpas. The results of this program are very encouraging, Mr. Chairman. But it seems that the first stage in the process will last a long time. We are convinced that we must engage in transformative changes which would guarantee the strengthening of the triptych of the eradication of poverty, full employment, and work which is decent. In this case, we are of the view that the eradication of poverty and full employment can only be achieved unless there is a private sector which is robust, which is supported by a long-term substantial investment. The least developed country in the Americas, Haiti, for the first time, has at its head a number of leaders who are directly from the business community, and all the efforts now are being directed towards economic international assistance, which will be applied to Haiti for several decades now in order to strengthen the capacity of the state and the establishment of a legal and macroeconomic framework which would be favorable towards entrepreneurship and investment, taking into account the multidimensional aspect of poverty. We must emphasize solid public policies which are based on the added value, which would maximize the equality of opportunity and employment, which would be decent. This also involves health and, above all, education. A priority of the Haitian government with its program of universal schooling, which would be free and obligatory. Furthermore, the major obstacles for the eradication and the reduction of poverty identified by the experts in equality of income and the environmental precarity means that we need further responsibility, vision, and sensibility, and it means there has to have a mission which would involve strategy, regulation, and redistribution of resources. Finally, as part of the changes, which are the strategies in order to increase agricultural production, we have to have more cultivatable land, and we have to increase its use. And the government has to give further access to development in agriculture, along with the building of roads which would help for transport of peasant goods. In conclusion, Mr. Chairman, the government of Haiti commits itself once again to work in perfect cooperation with all of its partners in the international community and in the private sector in order to achieve the final objectives for the CDC and to make sure that they are coordinated with the 2030 program, a useful tool in order to achieve our common aspiration towards sustainable development and the well-being of our peoples. Thank you very much.
So I think the applause is a very good comment on the interesting presentation you made. I think you showed how Haiti is obviously a poor country and has a lot of big challenges, but seeing the use of new technology and ICT and the need for new infrastructures in a broader context of the whole issue of societal development. And you talked about poverty, which is really important, and the need to actually focus attention very much on disadvantaged people. Mothers with children you talked about, and also the elderly and also students, but also taking a long-term view, realizing this is a long haul, but there can be quick wins as well, I think, as well. But you also interestingly mentioned international cooperation with the neighboring country, Dominican Republic. I think that's very important. Cross-border cooperation, especially when you have similar challenges, can be extremely useful, I think. Not just sharing experiences, but maybe joint programs as well. I don't know whether that's what you meant, but I think that's very important. And so thank you very much for that. And we need to move on as time is running. I'd like to now call upon the Deputy State Secretary from Hungary. I can see you smiling there, so the floor is yours, Madam.
Thank you for giving me the floor. These presentations and statements were really inspired, so I would like to introduce some Hungarian measures in this field. We have many programs and strategies for sustainable and resistant societies on regional and international level. When we talk about sustainable development, we have to face with not only the environmental challenge, but the key issue is a holistic worldview. The issues of environmental, social, human, and economic sustainability must be treated in the context of the 21st century. The Agenda 2030 program covered these issues. However, in order for mankind to have an agreeable natural environment and a prosperous future, there should be a population that is able to enjoy it. Emphasis should be laid on this aspect. This is especially true for Europe, because most of the member states of the European Union has an aging society. Hungary is in the same situation. When we say that we are interested in sustainability, it should mean not only the sustainability of the natural environment, but that of the population too. In the Hungarian government opinion, sustainable development can be achieved if we are pursuing a family-friendly policy. A principle of Hungarian government family and youth policy is that children and a large family cannot mean poverty, and parents should be offered the opportunity to decide if they wish to stay at home and raise their children for a longer period of time, or to return to the labor market as soon as possible. Therefore, parents and parents-to-be are offered, on the one hand, childcare and family support, and on the other hand, at the same time, benefits that promote return to the labor market and development of daycare of children. That's why we give them the opportunity of the family homestar subsidy, tax allowance for first-wed new couples, and therefore we take over the mortgage or student loan for young people who are undergoing child. Moreover, 2018 is the year of families in Hungary. So one of the government's main objectives is to implement a turn in demographic trends, but we have another important priority in our youth policy. When it comes to resilient society, nowadays one of our most important goals is to increase the digital access, but also the digital consciousness of young people. We have a digital welfare program, and we have already had some great results. For example, we reduced the value-added tax of the internet from 27% to 5%, so more people can easier and cheaper access to internet and to the world. But we should give answers to the disadvantages of the internet and help young people to avoid cyber attacks against them. In order to increase these aims, the Digital Immune Reinforcement Program was launched, and the Digital Immune Reinforcement Roundtable was formed with professionals from the governmental and business sector. The program is based on Hungary's digital child protection strategy, accepted in 2016 by the government. Some other best practices can be mentioned here in connection with sustainable development, volunteering program, Sustainability Week in elementary and secondary schools, provision of textbooks free of charge in elementary schools, Eco-School program and Green Kindergarten program. We believe, according to the introduced measures above, that Hungary is committed and dedicated towards SDG targets and the sustainable support of young generations. Thank you for your kind attention.
Thank you very much. Being a European myself, I recognise many of the things you're talking about there. Also the challenge of the ageing society, which I'm also already an example of, but you're not. So that's but I think the focus also again on family and also youth. Youth unemployment, though it's going down in Europe, is still a huge problem, and it is a problem around the world. So I think digital consciousness, which you mentioned, I think is really critical. Access and affordability, which has been mentioned before, of course, by Maria and others, I think is very important. But also mention the cyber attacks and the security issues, which we hear all about in the news all the time. But this is very important. But I mean, the governments can do a lot on that, and they should do a lot. But it's also a question of, I think, as you pointed out, that the individual users' awareness to protect themselves and also to be sensible on the net. And not to exploit other people who may be vulnerable. So all these things, I think, go together. And I know that Europe is trying to do a lot in this area, and I think it's very, very important. So thanks for pointing that out. I would now like to turn to Africa and to Ghana. And Your Excellency, Member of Parliament in Ghana, the floor is yours, sir.
I will want to ask a question, and my question will be contextualized in definitions. How do we define connectivity in the context of a developing country? Is connectivity, particularly in the field of poverty reduction or poverty eradication, is connectivity counted, whether we're coming from a basic needs approach, whether we're coming from relative deprivation approach, whichever of the approaches of poverty? Are we including connectivity, and does it have an impact on definition, particularly when international organizations are at play? When they come to developing countries, they use all sorts of indicators. How do we operationalize connectivity in definitions, particularly as this relate to development and poverty reduction? That is my first question. My second one is, how do we use internet connectivity to bring communities together rather than dismantle communities? In developing countries, the more people get connected, the less communal they become, even though the world is becoming a global village. But we are losing our villages arising out of connectivity. You take a typical family, you go to the dining table, and almost everybody is on one app or the other. That sense of communalism, that made us a family, that made us a people, we seem to be losing it in the age of connectivity. How do we reverse that? Thank you.
I think you raise some really important questions, which you deserve some good answers. I'm sure you have your own ideas as well. But I'd like to throw this open to the panel, particularly, first of all, from China, of course, because this was certainly the subject of your discussion, both in terms of physical infrastructure, but also ICT infrastructure, and your success in reversing or stopping the drift from the villages to the major cities. So please, sir, if you give us your thoughts on this.
Okay. Thank you for the question. And I think for the connectivity, from my presentation, I think at least two indicators. measures could be used. One is for a community or something, they need more pathway to connect with outside the world. So from either the expressway, air routes, and the railway. So there should be more exits to connect with outside the world. It's not closed. Secondly, this connection must help to save time. The distance is not a barrier anymore for people to get together for trade and for business. So that's my preliminary thinking about the connectivity. The second question I think is very challenging, and I mean it's right now for my second cases in China is Taobao Village. That's interconnectivities. Since the young generation normally they especially in the countryside they would like to move to the cities. Then they left behind their parents and even their young children at home. So because now there's an online shop and they can open their shop in the countryside. They can order their the goods, services rapidly. Right? They can really to get those services or goods almost the same quality as they have in the urban area. So many young people would like to stay in their own hometowns, to stay with their family, the old generation, the parents, and also the children. So that's the positive side. But you're right to argue, it's, right now it's also challenging that when people gathered, in China we said that when everybody is looking at the mobile phone, then it's time to say goodbye. So when they are gathered at the dinner table, so when everybody is looking at their mobile phone, then it's time to finish the dinner, something like that. So it's really it's challenging how to address that. I got no idea. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Noor, would you like to answer?
I'd love to add something in here. How do we bring connectivity back to the social aspect, to the social life? And I think what's important to remember is that we need to take a decision to disconnect, to connect, to disconnect from the internet, to connect with real people, with our own lives. We live virtual lives nowadays, and we're disconnected from the real life. We are not present in our lives. We are present in a virtual life, watching other people. And this calls for families to make decisions to minimize time for connectivity, to turn Wi-Fi's at some point. It's for maybe a decision to get some spaces that are Wi-Fi free. We have Wi-Fi's in parks and all that. That's good. But in parks, we want to connect with each other. It's not with our computers. There are decisions that has to be made and resurrect some of the time to live our own lives. And if the people here who were old enough to have lived without the mobile phones know that we used to live, we experienced life, and maybe we need to go back to that at least for some time. Thank you.
I'm really glad you raised that point. It goes back to the discussion we had with Donna and with Maria about, the balance between the physical life and the online life, and actually we need to get a much more, I think, empowering relationship between the two, and that's about awareness and education, of course, but it's very much an individual and a family responsibility, but to give them the tools to do that. And I know that your presentation was very much along those lines. Do you have any comments, Walter, on this? Or
perhaps reflecting upon your question, I think is of great importance to measure connectivity in terms that we're interested on measuring. I think an obsession with number of individuals connected to the net is, respond to your question, not a good measure at all. And it may actually cover some persisting problems of, for instance, economic opportunity. Perhaps your question leads us to believe, or to at least examine the possibility that we should not care about connectivity at all, but only as a subordinate quality of other measures, say access to credit, or the ability to access markets, or the ability to secure an income from wages. And only when we imagine digital services subordinated to these measures, we may have a substantive connectivity measure. And as to regarding what you said, something that was right on. Sometimes it feels that the more internet we are connected, the less communal we are. Perhaps it's also now not on the economic policy side, but on the symbolic power of leadership, all the way from the top to teachers, insist on the qualities of interpersonal relations that are not mediated by this means, will be a rediscovery of each other. And that, I suppose, that there's very little incentives, economic incentives, that will apply at the dinner table, other than those cultural cues of authority and leadership, suggesting that if you are to check your phone during dinner time, the punishment will be to follow Twitter of the president for 2 hours.
I wanted to address your first question a little bit about what does it mean to be connected. And I think particularly in rural and remote areas, it doesn't necessarily mean to be connected in your home. There's a wonderful example, but that there is a community gathering place where people can go to get connected and also share with each other what they are learning and what they have learned. I know that that is a strategy that was adopted in Botswana when they decided to get their entire country, because there's, I guess, 2 million people spread out over a vast area. And so they wanted to make sure that every village had a place. They wired the country, but wanted to make sure that every village had a place where people could go and be connected to the internet to get the kind of information that they needed about health and agriculture and just to enjoy things. So it doesn't necessarily mean you always have it in your pocket, but it means that there is a meaningful way to get access very close to you. But the other thing, the second question is what do you do as a family, and and I don't know what resources there are for parenting in the digital age, but the one thing that I think it's so hard is to make sure that there's quality family time every day where the people in the family connect with each other and do so, and that they're used to that time. I know when I was growing up, I'm an only child, and part of the family time was washing the dishes, and my mother refused to get a dishwasher because she valued the time talking to me while we were washing the dishes together. I don't know what that has to do with anything now, other than to say that she had created that space and then was very strong about not wanting to give it up.
Just wanted to thank you for those fantastic questions, Your Excellency. I just wanted to make a very additional point aside from what this expert panel said on two aspects. I believe there's a need to reconceptualize what we mean by connectivity. And not only based on what Walter was saying on measuring number of people connected, that is not enough, we all know that, but we also need to understand that, especially for the younger generations, the millennials and alike, the way they interact, the way they form community, the way they create relationships is very much based on this. So knowing how to measure that aspect, which we are not doing a good job actually, is critical. Perhaps that will give us a little bit of more peace of heart, or perhaps not, of the effects of technology in connectivity, as you mentioned. And one other aspect that I wanted to, and I'm sure that many of you working in this important aspect of social development know, as connectivity has grown, another perhaps related, perhaps not, phenomenon is happening, and is the reduction of social spaces, public social spaces, for people to come together, for people to interact and talk, and they are not mediated by any technology or any institution. And I'm not sure if those two are related, perhaps it's a connection, but that might help balance a little bit that obsession with the technology. We need more social spaces, more public social spaces for all of us to come together.
No, I think that's a really important point, and that often means redesigning our physical environments in the cities, but also other places. So it's the family is critical, and then maybe we should look to France for understanding how families can get together around a good food and a good meal and things like that. But without the internet, so maybe you go online and you find the latest menu, you know. But but we should learn a lot from France. But also, it's the family and it's the community. And the physical spaces and how we design them, which is both a public and a private challenge. Thank you very much for that fantastic question. We need to move on. I'd like to call upon representative from South Africa to make a statement or ask a question, or both.
Thank you very much, moderator. Thank you for the panel. It was a good discussion. As South Africa, we would like to share with you the importance of technology and innovation, and how good it can have a positive impact to our communities. In South Africa, before 1994, we did not have a centralized uniform system supporting those that are vulnerable and in poor conditions. So the dawn of the new South Africa ensured that the policies and legislation were in place to ensure that there is a uniformity in the social protection of the vulnerable. So the country then came up with the establishment of the South African Social Security Agency, an agency that was going to be responsible and be instrumental in ensuring that there was transition from a fragmented social security system into a single and effective national social assistance program. Today, we look back with pride at the road of the agency that has crossed, at the impressive progress that we have made as a country to move forward the abject poverty of the millions among our people in the country. Some of the major achievements that demonstrate technological advancements include, amongst others, using social pension system, which is a SocPen. At the press of a button, more than 17 million grant recipients received their various grant types at the end of the month. This is unprecedented even among developing countries, that unconditional cash transfers are provided in this fashion. Through this today, we can confidently stand up and say that this agency is living to its slogan, which says that paying the right person at the right time, at the right place, always, which is Njalo. We have also biometrically enrolled all social grants participants, including beneficiaries, the procurators, and children. This information is used for life status confirmation and authentication before payments is made to eliminate fraud, in order to ensure that we pay the right people. It is important to bear in mind that individual information also contains their ID number, which is a unique citizen identifier number contained in our population registration system and within our Department of Home Affairs. By doing so, we are able as government to determine if our social security beneficiaries also benefit from other social protections because the systems are linked to each other. For example, we are able to follow each child grant beneficiary if it's attending school and how is that child performing at school, and also to check if there are other social protection services that that particular child or family is receiving. Finally, the agents have also been able to automate the record management system, which is then the beauty of having innovation as well as the systems in place in ensuring that we meet the needs of our communities. The second example that we feel that it's important to ensure that as we come up with our policies, we also ensure that there is innovation and interconnectedness is the issue of the Gender-Based Violence Command Center, which was a response to the high levels of violence against women and children that are abused within the country. So we came up with this as an innovation, the command center. We employ social workers and other therapists to ensure that they provide immediate care and support and psychosocial support to those that are affected as a result of gender-based violence. So what happens is that we have a 24-hour service where the beneficiaries or the victims of gender-based violence will contact us through a toll-free number, and then immediately it's got a geotech facility. The therapist can track the caller, that the caller is coming from this area. And then in instances where we need to activate the police, we do so that those victims are supported accordingly. I can indicate, moderator, that through this innovation and interconnectivity, the center has won a number of awards. The latest one was we participated and competed with Africa, Asia, and Europe on the technological innovation category in 2015, and when we came to London, where we won a golden award. And the center has also in November 2015 won another award in Las Vegas in USA, where we won the gold medal. We're a gold medal winner in the world as the best technology innovation small center in the world. That shows that through innovation and technology, we can be able to drive social policy towards ensuring that we improve the services that we deliver to our people. I thank you, moderator.
Thank you for those insights and those are interesting examples and how to deploy the technology innovation in a social context to tackle real problems and have big success with that. I mean, both the command center for responding within 24 hours to gender-based violence, but also you talked about the citizen identity number to help sort of disadvantaged people, poorer people particularly, to get access to social protection, social assistance, I think is very important. I know that in India they've also got a biometric system which I think is really ambitious and I think working quite well with some teething troubles, as is always the case with technology. So this is one of the ways we can use technology well to help poorer people get access to the often myriad of different assistance programs there are out there, and there's no other way of actually understanding what they're entitled to. And it's a big leap forward and a positive leap forward when that can happen. So thank you very much for that. I'd now like to move on to Burkina Faso, just north of Ghana. So we're staying in that part of the world. So, sir, the floor is yours.
Yeah. Merci bien. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. And I'd like to thank the panelists above all. I'm taking the floor on behalf of Burkina Faso to tell you how we see this item. Innovation and interconnectivity are such that we've taken a look at this, and we have a vision, a common one, and we have tried to take advantage of the technological programs for development, economic and social development. Mr. Chairman, some subjects are rather complex, but we believe that these subjects should not make us shrink from the task. Burkina Faso, in analyzing this, is such that we think that poverty reigns above all amongst the youngest, and that's between 15 and 35, and that's more than 60% of the population. Poverty also has a rural face. Using technology progress means that in this context, we have to do this tactfully, and we use what's called the high-intensity approach. That is to emphasize the use of human capital instead of technological capital, which of course enables us to employ these young people and reduce by the same token the rate of poverty. And this is why the subject is very important for us when we talk about technological progress globally. However, the second aspect is ethics. Ethics is making great progress today, and vein that I would like to address Ms. Amaraki in developing further what she talked about today. We can say that with ethics, we can deal with social protection and transfer resources to the populations which have been targeted in this regard. We are able to pay taxes and carry out transfers, and because of IT, we can use IT. I was going to say this is something marvelous, but as she said, this is where we should pay further attention with regarding to IT. This is so that we might take another closer look at other problems. They're interconnected, and we might ignore them totally. So this is a question of culture, and it's rather important when we talk about ethics. Now, ethics is a question of insecurity in our countries, which are very remote, and there is a contradiction in one milieu and another, and so ethics creates divisions. Ethics creates divisions and has, in addition to the many advantages we have. But the question still remains, are countries prepared to take advantage of the profits from technology, yes or no, when you say that today Africa cannot really resist technology and progress? So the proposal was such that we have to pay for governance with technology, and in our countries in the sub-Saharan area, we really have to benefit from technological progress in such a way that it's in the rural areas and does not prevent further human progress. Thank you.
Thank you again for that. That's also building on the themes which we've discussed, but putting in relation to using IT to help poorer people to have access to the social protection schemes which they're entitled to, and simplifying those processes. That's very important. But you also mentioned ethics, I think, which is good to come back to that, because you know, we can discuss for a long time, and I'm sure the philosophers here can discuss it as well. But actually, the human ethic and the attitude to the human dignity, which is connected to that, and the rights-based approach, I think they all go together, and we need to reinforce those, I think, very strongly when we're looking at technology. Particularly, most of the technology is provided by large companies, of course, international companies who don't perhaps know local contexts and local situations. So we need to make them aware also of what the technology, what effects it's having, both good and bad in particular countries, and to work locally with the governments and also the local localities in different countries. So I think this aspect is really important. So thanks for coming back to that. I'd like now to move on to the Honourable Representative from Cuba, who wishes to make a statement or ask a question. Where are we? Over there?
Gracias, señor presidente.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My delegation is grateful for the statements made by the panelists and by you as a moderator, which we think are very relevant. We thought the questions raised here on the social dimension of computerization and the information with regard to access in developing countries in particular. I'll just make a comment on certain aspects which my delegation also considers of interest. Access to information technology should be focused on the well-being of people, improve the quality of their lives and accessibility to public services. These technologies should not be used for military purposes or subversive purposes which affect social development in many countries. Furthermore, the existence of a global, unfair economic system has a direct effect on the increase of the digital divide, both at national level, but in particular between the various countries. This, we think, is a sort of technological discrimination because of the differences at levels of development. In order to prevent the negative effects, we must, among other action, which we have discussed here, encourage a genuine international cooperation and eliminate action which are contrary to international law in this field. For example, the implementation of unilateral coercive measures which limit access to financing, technological advances and infrastructure in information technology. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think it's useful to come back to, which you stress very much, the international cooperation and going back to international law on this and thinking about the macro global situation, I think is very important, and how the global society and economy works, which is not always equitable and not always in the best interest, even of the richer countries, especially of the richer countries, I would hasten to add. So thank you for raising that point. I think I would like now to go to probably the last, or should be the last, intervention from the European Union. Okay, the floor is yours, sir.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Moderator. The EU would like to raise one question, but before that I would like also to provide a very concise contextual elements. Digitalization, automation and robotization are drivers for change. You have also indicated this. They create both potential for social progress and positive social innovation, but as well as important challenges that have also been raised by members of the panel. The authorities at all levels, social partners and wider civil society have to develop policies, rules and practices to maximize the benefits and minimize the negative dimensions. The EU and its member states are actively developing such an approach, making digital innovation as one of their main priorities. In September 2017, at the time the Estonian presidency of the Council of the European Union organized in Tallinn the first European Digital Summit, gathering on this issue EU heads of state and government. One of the important topics addressed at this summit was the future of economies and societies, and how we can seize the economic and social opportunities that digitalization presents, but without leaving anybody behind. We know all the great potential offered by technological innovations, including, for instance, facilitating the integration into society of persons with disabilities and improving the provision of health services and of skills development. And several examples have been given already by members of the panel. The European Union and its member states are very much engaged in debates together with our member states, as Germany has also indicated, on the future of work. We have to provide the right skills as well as social protection, including for those in new forms of work. Therefore, the European Union has proclaimed the new European Pillar of Social Rights that was, as I said, proclaimed in Gothenburg 2 months ago in Sweden. It takes fully into account the emergence of new forms of work, as well as the other new challenges in social protection and inclusion. And now I come to the question. It is crucial that the international community identifies and promotes good technologies, good policies and practices, so that technological advances the benefit and social innovation and leaves nobody behind. But this will require cooperation between all stakeholders. And how can the Commission for Social Development make a further contribution towards that process of harnessing the use of technology for social development? Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you very much for that. The need for stakeholder cooperation, of course, is critical, because it's not just governments who are regulating or developing policy. It needs to be across the whole spectrum of society, of course. But governments often have to take the lead, I guess, and also with civil society. So, Europe, as you know better than me, is trying to reinvent its social policy. And I think the developments in the Pillar of Social Rights, social investment policy, social investment package, I think, are part of this process. And so it's I think what's happening in Europe, and I'm living there, so I know to some extent, is a really positive way forward if it can get its act together properly. And I think it looks as though, my view is that it's going in the right direction. But it's very, very hard. Any international community organisation like the United Nations, the European Union, has immense problems to face, of course, because of the political nature of what's going on. But there's a lot of positive things that can be done through cooperation. And I think the Estonian leadership in the last 6 months was really important in that context. So I'd like to leave the question on the table and come back to it at the end, because we still have some NGOs that I'd like to call upon first, and they may have some points to make. So then I'll round up when we've invited the NGOs to make their statements with some final comments from the panel. So I'd like to move on to the Baha'i international community, who representative from this organisation to make a statement or ask a question. Are you here, sir, madam, still?
Good afternoon. Good afternoon, and thank you for the opportunity. Our question is, the Secretariat's note on the emerging theme highlights the importance of taking human values, ethics, and well-being into account in developing and adopting new forms of technology. How, then, can we make sure that new forms of technology serve purposes that are valued and defined by members of communities themselves, and that technology is not adopted simply for its own sake or to respond to particular economic interests? Thank you.
I didn't hear you 100% clearly, but I think you were saying, how can we ensure that the technology doesn't just have a life of its own, but is actually designed, implemented to take account of social welfare issues and social good? I think this is your question, yes?
Yes.
Which is the crux question, of course, right? So, again, I'll put it on the table if it's okay, and get some final comments at the end from our distinguished panel. So thank you very much for that. It's bringing us back to where really the core nub issue. I'd like to also call upon the International Federation on Aging, the representative of this organization, to make a statement or ask a question.
Good afternoon. My name is James O'Neill. I'm representing the International Federation on Aging. Economic disasters are as devastating as environmental disasters. Enhancing resilience requires more than reducing vulnerability. It also calls for empowerment. What can governments do to recognize that people of all ages can be both the agents and the beneficiaries of progress? what concrete steps can be taken to ensure that the voices of all stakeholders are heard? What innovative measures are being taken by governments to reach and listen to those left furthest behind first?
Okay, thank you. A very concrete but difficult question. What are the concrete steps to ensure that all stakeholders are included? Again, this is the critical question, and I'll shortly ask the panel to respond to that. I'd like to call upon the Seroptimist International representative to make a statement or ask a question. Also up there. Okay, they're all up there. Right, okay.
My name is Barbara Rockman. I represent Seroptimist International here at the UN. We work to educate and empower women and girls on a global basis. Well, I'm happy that I had to actually rewrite my question because it was about inequalities for women in tech and innovation, and the women speakers did address these issues to a great extent and talked about the need for more equality and have highlighted some specific programs. However, I think we all know that historically women have been left behind when it comes to technology and that it's still a man's world. One of the panelists, who I will murder his name, Mr. Vanovad, stated that advances in technology exacerbate inequalities, and as he says, business models will be used, and that will surely mean, and are being used, of course, it will surely mean that they will discriminate against women. So my question, and I'm being discriminatory, I'm directing my question to the men on the panel. Women need access, but they need much more. What actions can promote their full participation in the development and operation of interconnected networks and their participation as leaders as technology and innovation march forward? Thank you.
Okay, so you're determined to put us on the spot.
Exactly.
Thank you. I'd like to... Okay, I'd like now to turn to the Honourable Representative from Kenya to ask a question, make a statement. Madam,
thank
the floor
you.
is yours.
Thank you, Moderator. As Kenya, we just want to share the way technology and innovation has revolutionized the way we live and help reduce the cost of doing business, as well as creating many jobs, particularly at the sub-national levels. The installation of underwater cable, fiber optic cable in 2009 has helped to reduce the price of bandwidth with about 90% and facilitated the creation of innovation hubs that can now offer high-speed internet connections to entrepreneurs at affordable prices. One of the innovation hubs, iHub, has so far incubated 152 new companies and has helped create 1,184 jobs since its launch. The government is also aiming to create constituency innovation hubs in every county, that is in every sub-national level, to provide affordable internet access to the public, thus mitigating the digital divide and promoting innovation and the use of technology in areas outside the nation's capital. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that. I was hoping Kenya would make a statement because you're so famous for MPs, you Shahidi, and you name it, everything else. Really a fantastic example of a so-called developing country which is leading the way in technology and showing us in the so-called more developed countries how to do it. So thank you for that. Africa's tech hubs, innovation hubs are famous, of course, not just in Kenya but across the continent, and we need more of those because they're creating jobs, as you say, but they're also centres where people can get together, have new ideas for new companies, and actually make a contribution to the locality and their community. So that it's really important. So I'm glad you raised that. I'd like to go back now to the NGOs, I think. The Sail of Hope would like to make an intervention. Okay.
Господин ведущий, благодарю.
Thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to speak. I would like to say that I'm speaking not just on behalf of my country, but a mother of four, and who deals with ethics and protocol. I really am concerned when I see that in a few years I might hear from my child, my son and my daughter, that they were subject to aggression on the internet and were attacked. And we have an etiquette, we have programs, and now we're talking about the negative results of globalization and access to the internet. But as a protocol association, if we are going to teach programs and we have these generally accessible, we could, along with you, avoid aggression and aggression against our children. And as a mother, I'm very much concerned that our new future generations might have this problem because children are really not acquainted with ethics or etiquette in life, and they might come against these questions online where they might be hearing from anybody, and they might have a few moral activities which would go unpunished. So we have programs which might be given in any country, in any school, to fend these off, and we could perhaps get assistance in order to make these all together acceptable and accessible. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much for that timely intervention. We've discussed a lot some of the benefits and also some of the disadvantages, but this issue around people's behavior on the net, especially young people, and the problem is exacerbated, of course, because the parents and the teachers haven't experienced it themselves. This is something completely new. So we need a radical rethink, and in my view, and a series of initiatives to try to counter this. And NGOs like yours, I think, are leading the way. So this is really important. I don't have an answer, of course, to this. But what I'm going to do now is to put these issues to the panel to make a final statement. We've got the issue here on the table about how do we counteract aggression on the net, people misusing the internet because maybe they feel that their identity can't be seen, but also bullying other people, especially younger people, maybe school children. There's also the issue of, if I can find my notes, how we take concrete steps to ensure that all the stakeholders are engaged and consulted, and also how we use the new technology to support social rights and the social policies which governments need to enact to make sure that the Sustainable Development Goals are achieved. And so there's a number of questions there. I'd like to go down the line. And
the question for men about...
Yeah, I was just going to come to that. Can I answer first on that? I don't have the answer, of course, but the women in my family, they're way ahead of me already. So but I think just quickly, role models are very important, and we need to support role models in the IT sector and new technology, and also maybe some form of obligatory reporting about how the gender balance is taking place across the different sectors, both in the public and private. And I noticed the delegate from Iceland has gone, but they've got some interesting policies on this, which would have been useful to hear from. So those are my two suggestions: role models and much more reporting, obligatory reporting about the way ICT is being used and implemented and exploited by women and girls. I think maybe one way forward. So maybe I should start with you, Noor, to address some of these questions.
Okay, I'll selectively choose what to answer. So I'll start by first emphasizing the importance of education for parents to be able to help children navigate the net. But I would like also to emphasize that children as well, we need to rethink the kind of access to children. It's there should be some limits to what children should access. And I think we address so many issues, but we neglected to address one issue, one important issue. The most important stakeholder in all this discussion are tech companies, and tech companies are not regulated. So we recently heard about Facebook voluntarily changing its rules, and Apple as well, because of pressure from their shareholder as well, rethinking how parenting, putting some parenting guidelines with the use of their phones. So I think the tech companies themselves need to be part of the discussion, and there should be some sort of mandatory regulation for tech companies.
Okay, thank you. I've just been told we have a minute each left, so you were very precise. Yeah. So, sir, from...
Just in response to the EU representative's question, and also it's in a sense a comment on the note prepared by the Secretariat on a mixed approach to response to the digital world. The positive approach is right scale or investment in education and lifelong learning. The protective measure or approach is social protection, but I think this is the correct mix. But I think it's necessary to have some detailed to put some actual emphasis on how to say engagement of industry and business sector in the education development, because it's so technology has developed so rapidly. It's really absolutely necessary to involve them in the education development, including the curriculum design or something. And also at the same time, moreover, it's necessary to emphasize on the on-job training and learning by doing. So that's for the positive approach. I need to give the two actual points. And for the protective approach is social protection. The document only mentioned is basic unconditional income for all adults. I think that probably those would be applied to some developing country, but for many developing countries, they have tried like a conditional cash transfer scheme. I think that should be also included in the as a means to provide some basic income protection. Thank you.
Thank you. Also? Yeah.
I'll take only a couple of questions from the set. The first, with respect to how to improve the representation of a plurality of values in the way technology are developed, as Nur suggested, regulation is one way. Another way, instead of regulation, is to foster competition. And each individual country can decide on their own how do they want to configure the landscape of competition for services like search engines or social media, such that more than one provider would create an environment of greater attention to the values of the society that uses those services. And to the question on the specific question on how to improve representation of women in technological development decisions, I don't have a general question, but I do have a modest suggestion of procedure. In projects of inclusivity, a great way to empower a traditionally marginalized group of any sort is to grant that individual a veto power. Then the rest of the committee starts listening closely to what the person with the veto power has to say. That's it.
Okay, Maria? Okay.
No, go ahead.
Sorry. Just wanted to say thanks again, and just one aspect that is related, going back, I think Walter mentioned this, if our commitment to spur social development through innovative technological innovations, we need to acknowledge that those innovations are designed for commercial purposes, not social purposes. Very few are designed for social purposes in mind, first and foremost. The social purposes of those technologies and those innovations have been developed by the communities. I truly believe, going back to, I believe, His Excellency from Germany and Excellency from Ghana, the importance of stakeholders. Technology companies need to be seen in this forum for them to be able to understand the different role they can play, not only in regulation. I know that word is poisonous for some people, but in terms of what we know about people using technology, meaning data. We need to make everybody count, and social policies can help us with that. And technology companies, I believe, must be part of this conversation. Thank you.
And I just want to address the question of what the Commission can do. I think my colleagues and the other NGOs will agree that there is wonderful work going on in different places all over the world to address many of the problems and issues that have been raised here today. But it's going on in isolation, and it's not connected, and we really have not gotten the ability to be able to see local solutions from one area that can be used, can be adapted and reused successfully in other areas. So my plea to the Commission is help us connect with each other and connect our communities so that those solutions can be used, and it won't seem like such difficult, hard problem to tackle these issues in many parts of the world.
Thank you very much for that. And I'm amazed, actually, because this is a very complex and deep issue, of course, straddling many different areas, but there's been a lot of, I won't say unanimity, but a lot of similarity in the approaches and the insights reached. There's no time to go into all those in detail now, but maybe there will be a written report on this. But just one word on regulation. I think no regulation, I think, is a form of regulation, of course, right? And what we need is smart regulation. Doesn't have to be heavy, but smart, pushing in the right direction, which is a benefit for the whole society. And that needs collaboration between the stakeholders, definitely. Yeah? And there are some good examples around the world where this is happening already. I'd like to thank you very much, the audience and the panel, for a fantastic discussion, which I've really enjoyed, and I hope you've enjoyed it too and gained some insights. And I would now like to hand over to the chair.
Okay. Distinguished delegates, we have come to the end of this afternoon's panel discussion on emerging issues towards sustainable and resilient societies, innovation and interconnectivity for social development. Once again, I would like to thank our distinguished moderator, Mr. Jeremy Millard, for skillfully steering our discussion, as well as our distinguished panelists and delegations for actively participating in an interesting exchange of views. Finally, I would like to announce that tomorrow at 10 a.m., the Commission will hold its high-level panel discussion on the topic entitled The Third Review and Appraisal of Madrid Plan of Action on Aging. And I would like also to thank all the interpreters for their extra work and hard work. The meeting is adjourned. Thank you.